Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel TechCraft. Today in this video we are going to discuss about the pod and deployments. Okay, so we will see the actual deployment of the pods in a live cluster. So without wasting any time, let's just jump to the video. So this is the agenda. We'll get to know about the pod. Actually have covered pod, but just we'll get the uh, overview of it. And then deployment, namespace, labels, and selector, YAML creation, and then the actual deployment. So for the overview of it, just for the recap purpose, pods are the smallest deployable units that are created and managed in Kubernetes. It can have one or more container which will share the same storage and network resources. Each pod is assigned a unique IP, and you can have multiple replicas. So deployment is another way to create the pods, um, but it is more a declarative and automated way to manage the containerized applications. It allows you to declare the desired state of the application, and Kubernetes master node will manage the actual state to match the desired state. So if you remember, one component does that. One component actually takes care of matching the desired state with the active state. Okay, so it is a question to you now: which component does that? Okay, I'll just give a hint. It is in the control plane. It is in the master node. So yeah, if you know the answer, just comment it. Okay, then deployment will also handle the scale up and scale down of the applications or the pods that you cannot. If you want to scale down it as per the load, you can scale it down using a deployment. So namespace, it provides a way to organize and isolate resources within a cluster. So you can actually isolate your resources based on the namespace in a cluster. But first you will have to create the namespaces. Okay, by default, when you create a Kubernetes cluster, it creates a default namespace, and there are other namespaces as well. But whatever applications you will create, and if you're not providing the namespace name, then it will go to the default namespace. Okay, and actually, and also it provides the resource isolation, resource quota, and access control. So actually you can put quota into the namespaces, put a limit into it, and also you can put the access control into your namespace. So you can create one group of people who can have access to only one namespace only. So you can actually do that using the access control. Isolation, you can do that, like for example, you have an applications called front end applications. You can create a namespace of front end, and you can put all the applications into the front end namespace. Similarly for the backend. So that's how you can isolate your resources using the namespace. Labels and selectors. Labels are the key value pair that are attached to the object, such as pods. Labels do not provide uniqueness. Uh, it just uh, um, it just put a label into a pod. And selector, it attached the Kubernetes objects based on its label. Okay, so they both communicate with each other, labels and selectors. So suppose in a pod you provide the labels. Okay, now you want that pod to get attached with the service. So in the pod you provide a label called app is equal to front end app, basically. So same label you can use as a selector in a service file, in a service. So in a service you will use selector app is equal to front end. Okay, and then when you will apply those things, you will see that the pod is attached to the service. Okay, so this comes in a interview questions as well, like how you will attach your pod with a service. So by using labels and selector, you can do that. Okay, not only with pods and selectors, pods and services, there are other resources as well, where you can use the labels and selectors. So now let's understand the YAML. So basically here we will do all the practical things. So API version, it has basically four major parts. One is API, kind, metadata, spec. API is, it provides the specifies the API version of the resource being defined. Okay, kind will provide the name of the resource that is going to be created. So example, pod deployment, what exactly you are going to create, you need to specify in kind. Metadata, this section includes some metadata about the serve resource such as the name, labels, etc. You can actually provide the metadata of this resource. Spec, it is called specification. So here you will provide the all the settings of the pod, like container image, ports, volumes, and does it basically the desired state of your resource. Okay, now let's go to the demo. For demo, I have created one VS Code, and I have created basically two YAML files, one pod and another deployment. So let's understand the YAML file first, and then we will go ahead and deploy it. So this is the API version of the pod. If you'll see, this deployment.yaml has a different API version. So all the resources have their each API version. The kind is pod. Here we are creating pod only. So that is there. Metadata, you can provide the name of the pod. So once you create the pod, the name of the pod will be Nginx. Okay. Labels, I am creating the labels as app equals my app. Okay, that label you can use in selector, as a selector in other resources. Specification, you can put the container's name, the containers, the actual application that you are going to create. So name of the container will be nginx, image will be nginx, and this port number. So image, from where it is fetching the image, from the Docker Hub. Okay, if you want your ACR, if you want to pull the image from the ACR, you'll have to provide the link of that image here only, then only it will pull the image from the ACR. So similarly, in the deployment file, we have the things. The kind here is deployment, name is this, and here this is the spec of the deployment. Okay, so deployment has replicas of three: selector, app, my example, anything you want, you can put there. And this template is the template of the pod, which will have which you are going to create. And how many pods it will create? It will create three pods. Okay, because a replica is three. Later you can scale down and scale it up. It depends on you. So this is how. And the cluster we are using AKS demo, okay, which is here. So this is the cluster that we are using. Now, before actually deploying it, let's see what is there. So we will be using kubectl command line in order to do all the operations in the cluster. Okay, so just check the namespaces. You can use namespace. So basically here we have four namespaces. Okay, this is a default namespace. This is kube node, kube public, kube system. Okay, so basically all the operations will be happening inside the default namespace. All the, if you are not providing any namespace name in the pods in the deployment, it will go to the default namespace. Now these namespaces are for the clusters only. So if you'll see, get all name cube system. So in the cube system namespace, you have these things. So these are the like the deployment. See, connectivity agent is it was formerly called as network proxy agent. So this is that. Then kube proxy, then metric server, then the logs. So all these things are related to the Kubernetes control plane. Okay. So, and these are managed by the control plane. You don't have to manage all those things. It's clear. And in the, if you'll see, if you'll use get pod, you will see that there are no resources found in a default namespace. So by default, it is taking the namespace name. Okay, default namespace name. Now for creating the actual pods, you will use apply command, apply dash f, and then pod.yaml. Okay, so the YAML that I just showed you. When you hit enter, you'll see one pod is created. Now we'll use same command, get pod. So you'll see the Nginx pod is running. Now let's describe it and let's see what is there inside that pod. So basically, let's go from the start. So it is a name, namespace name, and node name. We have only one node, so it takes that. Then the label that we put, and then the IP of the pod. Now in the containers section, we have the container ID. This is the container ID, and it is created by container D. This is a Docker runtime. Okay, so this is a Docker runtime. Now this is the image ID. It is from the Docker library, as I told you. And then let's go to the event section. So here you will see what happens is, first it is default scheduler. Okay, which is the component of a control plane. It assigns the pod, this pod, to the this node. Okay, now it is pulling the image. Which is pulling the image? Kubelet is pulling the image. The image name is this. Kubelet successfully pulled image, and then Kubelet created the container and started the container. Okay, so inside Kubelet only this container D is present. Docker runtime is present. So that's why it's giving the name of kubelet. Okay, so now you have the pod. Now let's create the deployment. Apply dash f deployment dot yaml. So deployment is created. Now let's see what is the pod, the number of the pods. So now you see 3 pods are created from the deployment because we put the replica as 3. Now you can use get deployment to see the deployments. Just like you saw the pod, you can see the deployment. So this is the deployment name. It is 3 by 3. So 3 pods are running. Active state, desired state. Okay. So that is that. Now if you want to scale it down or scale it up, so you will use a scale command. Scale. Before that, let's see the let's describe the deployment file. Describe deployment. So here, this is the deployment. This is the file for the deployment. Okay. Earlier we showed you the deployment, the things inside the pod. Okay. So let's see what is there. So here, kubectl get put here. Yeah. So name of the deployment. Okay. So name of the deployment is example dash deployment that we gave. Then the labels, annotations, and see here. 3 desired state and 3 updated. Okay. Now here also, so this is the event only that controller did that, and uh, what it did, it scaled up the replica. So replica, it was 3, so it scaled up to 3. So that is the only event that is getting generated. So if you can use a describe command to to actually do the troubleshooting as well. If something is wrong with your pod, if something is not working, you can use that. Okay, now let's create the namespaces. Kubectl create namespace. Let's get the test namespace name. Okay, now see the namespaces. Now you see test namespace is getting created. Now we can actually use that namespace to deploy the pod. So before doing that, we can let's just delete the pod first. So delete pod nginx. Okay. So now I'll use the same apply command, apply dash f pod test namespace test. Okay. Now it is created. Now if you will use get pod, you will not see the nginx pod. Why? Because these are in default namespace and we are not providing any namespace, so by default it is taking the default namespace only. To get the pod of the namespace, you'll have to do dash n and then test. Now you see the nginx pod is created in the test namespace. Okay, so if you don't provide the name of the namespace, it will take the default namespace. Okay, now we will try to scale the replica of the deployment. Okay, so currently it's replica 3, so we will do replica 5. And also you can use this deployment dash yaml. Okay, kubectl, sorry. Okay, it will be replicas. Now it is scaled. Now you will see get pod. You see 5 replica here now. 2 replicas are getting added. These 2 replicas. Okay. Similarly, you can scale down using the same command, and you can put the replica number 2. Now this get pod. Now it's 2. Now if you'll see the kubectl get deployment, so it is 2 by 2. Okay, because we scaled it down. So that's how you will use a scale up and scale down. And actually you can see all these things in the Kubernetes as well. If you go to the namespace, see test namespace is there. You go to the workload, you will see these are the deployment in the namespace kubectl kube system. For default we have this pods. You can see all the pods here. You can filter it by namespace. For test namespace we have this pod. Replica set you will have in the default namespace. So this is the replica set. Okay, how many replicas? 2. So that's how you can create a deployment and pod and use the kubectl command to do all the things. I hope you like the video, and to get more about the AKS uh, resources and AKS videos, please subscribe to our channel.